Over the course of the past 25 years, there have been 5 feature films, a number of popular video games, and a multitude of various tie-in products with that trademarked dinosaur logo. But how exactly did all of this happen? And what made Jurassic Park the juggernaut that it is today? While it's true that most of the world was introduced to the story when Spielberg's 1993 movie hit theaters, it's also true to say that the story had already been widespread and acclaimed 3 years prior. Published in November of 1990, Michael Crichton's first dino-themed novel told the tale of genetic engineering, unpredictability in complex systems, and the resurrection of extinct prehistoric DNA. And that story garnered a lot of positive feedback. People loved it, and one person in particular, Mr. Spielberg himself, loved it so much that he went out to make Jurassic Park a reality on the big screen, with the help of Dr. Crichton no less. But far before any of that happened, there was the book. And far before that book was ever published, there was Crichton's writing. And in this video, I'm going to go over how the author managed to create such an awesome novel, the long, daunting process he went through in order to tell his story, and how it all managed to shape up into the property that we all know today. Here's how Michael Crichton created Jurassic Park. It all started in 1983, and oddly enough, it wasn't even for a book. You see, in the early 1980s, Michael Crichton was hard at work on creating a screenplay about cloning a pterodactyl from DNA. After much writing and hard work, he would unfortunately find that the story wasn't very convincing. You see, it was hard for the author to come up with a specific reason for somebody to clone an extinct animal. So he began to look for ideas on how this could happen in the real world. And eventually, he settled on the idea that the only way someone would actually put the money forth to do this would be if it was for some purpose of entertainment. And that's when he settled on building the story around a theme park. Along with this decision came the extensive research that the writer would have to do. One pterodactyl would soon turn into 15 different species of dinosaurs. So in order to bring this story to life, Michael Crichton drew from the work of 4 principal paleontologists. There was Robert Bakker, John Ostrom, Gregory S. Paul, and Jack Horner, the latter of which would eventually inspire the creation of protagonist Dr. Alan Grant. Now that the dinosaur types and behavior had been sorted, Crichton would have to do his best to sell the most crucial part of Jurassic Park to his audience. Just how exactly could it even be possible for somebody to clone a dinosaur? And so he began to draw from the works of well-renowned authorities, like the Extinct DNA Study Group from Berkeley, and the paleo-DNA work of Charles Pellegrino. The discussions of chaos theory came from Ivor Eklund and James Gleick, while the actual inspiration for Ian Malcolm originated from the work of the late Heinz Pagels. With all of this in mind, Crichton was ready to pin and pitch his story to the usual publishers. Yet in a surprising twist, all of them hated it. Crichton had completed his story and sent it out to everyone he knew that could get the book published, and all of them agreed indefinitely that they wanted nothing to do with Jurassic Park. But now you see, this version of Jurassic Park that Crichton had drafted was very different to the published novel that we all know today. You see, originally Crichton wrote Jurassic Park from the point of view of a child. A young boy was going to be present in the theme park while all of the dinosaurs were escaping, and the story would have revolved around this boy and his deep appreciation and love of dinosaurs. Because just as much as Crichton was interested in the hard science and animal behaviors that formed much of his work, he was also intrigued by children's fascination with dinosaurs. Just the mere fact that kids from all around the world cared so deeply about animals that had been long gone for millions of years really fascinated the author, and was part of the reason that he began creating the story way back in the 1980s.
The book actually began when my wife and I were waiting for our first child, and we were decorating the nursery, and I began to buy stuffed dinosaurs. I actually bought a lot of them, and it kind of couldn't stop, and eventually she began to say, what are all these dinosaurs, and why is this happening? And the whole question of children and dinosaurs began to preoccupy me, and I started the book.
The publisher's responses to Jurassic Park were sometimes quite angry, with people saying things like, why would you write a book like this? All of them unanimously hated it, but none of them were able to articulate just why. So Crichton took this criticism and rewrote Jurassic Park. Unfortunately, they still hated it, and so Crichton rewrote the book again, and guess what? They all hated it exactly the same. Finally, one of the readers explained why they were so irritated with the story. They said they didn't care about the point of view of a child, and in specific words, they said, I want this to be a story for me, meaning for an adult. This time, Crichton rewrote the story very different, with an adult as the main protagonist. And miraculously, after that, everyone liked it.
It's an odd experience. I mean, I was in San Francisco airport and some kids were buying books and one kid said, "Oh, did you read Jurassic Park?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I read that." So I turned around and I said, "Is it any good?" He says, "Yeah, it's good." Yeah, it's good.
Now, even though none of the publishers had the author's back during his writing process, there was one guy in particular that did, and that man was none other than Steven Spielberg himself. After telling his film director friend what he was up to in the world of books, Steven immediately became interested, and so the two of them began to plan ahead for the film adaptation of Crichton's story. Before the book was even published, the author would ask for no less than $1.5 million and a percentage of the gross when the movie would eventually be made. Every production company in Hollywood wanted to bid for their shot at making the film. Warner Brothers wanted Tim Burton to do it, Columbia wanted Richard Donner to do it, and 20th Century Fox wanted Joe Dante to make their version. But Universal would eventually acquire the rights in May of 1990 for Spielberg to specifically direct.
There's such a reality to it that's why I got really interested in this, because I said, God, science and adventure just come smashing together, and now it's based on what is probably going to happen someday.
Michael Crichton was paid a further $500,000 to adapt his own book to the big screen, and with this new project, the author made quite a few small changes. Unlike the ending of the original novel, Crichton chose to leave out the Costa Rican napalm bombing and opted instead to include a subplot where the dinosaurs would be revealed to all be doomed to die. This would later be worked into his sequel novel, The Lost World. Crichton's biggest change to the narrative, however, was the character of John Hammond. In the book, Hammond was seen as a very harsh and sometimes mean-spirited version of Walt Disney. However, in the first Crichton script, he was actually far more sympathetic. In the final cut of the film, we get a few scenes where Hammond and Nedry clearly don't get along with one another. Yet in the unused Crichton draft, there would have actually been a scene where John Hammond apologizes to Nedry about the way he's been acting lately. Hammond chose to do this at the comical moment when Dennis was planning on leaving the room after he just shut down the system, creating a pretty interesting scene that unfortunately never got made. Another change from his own novel was Hammond's death scene. In the book, it's used as a bittersweet and well-deserved end to a really dark old man. But in the Crichton screenplay, John's death is used as a means by which the billionaire makes in order to save his grandchildren. Hammond actually sacrifices himself to the Raptors in an effort to buy Lex and Tim some time in the visitor center. Talk about a very different third act. Despite these changes and a few others, most of Crichton's script would get rewritten and retooled by Malia Scotch-Marmo and David Koepp. Interestingly enough, the point of view of children and their fascination with dinosaurs would eventually be worked into the movie's plot. And despite what all of the publishers said about no one caring for a dinosaur story made for children, Jurassic Park became well-renowned the world over for Spielberg's incorporation of these original themes that Crichton had to excise from his published novel.
Is there another message here, though, that sometimes maybe we tinker with more things than we ought to be tinkering with?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm quite concerned that the genetic engineering is about to be a very widespread technology, and that people will have the capacity to use it frivolously if that's their interest. And so the notion that people might want to make square tree trunks for easier lumbering, or pale trout for easier fishing, this kind of fooling with our ecological heritage for what I think are absurd purposes is something that we're going to have to deal with.
In the end, Michael Crichton's creation of Jurassic Park and his involvement in the series was far longer than what I think most people knew about. His dedication to the initial story and what eventually culminated from it has become a pop culture phenomenon, and every existing title that holds that dinosaur logo owes all of their success to the man and his initial book. Had it never seen the light of day, we may be looking at a very different world for film, visual effects, science fiction, and even our understanding of science fact as well. None of this would have existed without him. Now before I go, I want to thank all of my game wardens, as well as all of my InGen executives. I'd also like to thank my park workers and InGen hunters as well. Words can't really express how awesome it is to have you guys tell me how much you enjoy the stuff I do, and I seriously am extremely thankful for everything that you guys do to show support. It honestly means the world. Now I'd like to thank you all for watching this video, and hope that you all enjoyed today's content. If you feel like I deserve it, I'd appreciate the like and hope that you'll consider subscribing if you're interested in hearing from me again. I'll see you on the next video, guys, and as always, take it easy.